Hey, welcome to Boat Marketing Podcast. My name is Harry Kazumi, and today our guest is Sydney Farnbrook, and she will talk to us, kind of answer a question. It's more of a conversation her and I we will have regarding ADA and website. Really, the question is, does your boat dealer website need to be ADA compliant? So we're gonna kind of unravel this question and answer it piece by piece to the best of our knowledge. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Sydney. And Sydney, can you give us a brief overview on ADA?
Yes. Hi everyone. My name's Sydney, Digital Marketing Manager, and I'm here to give you guys a little bit of information about ADA compliance and how it applies to websites and what it all means. So again, like Carrie said, we'll kind of just start with a brief overview. So if you don't know, which I'm sure a lot of you probably don't know, because it is something that is starting to be more in the news and all that, but a lot of people still don't know what it is. So ADA refers to the American Disabilities Act, which is an act that requires all public spaces to remove barriers to prevent an individual with a disability from accessing them. So when you go out to a restaurant or a store and you see wheelchair ramps, you see handicap parking spaces, you see things written in Braille, that is all because of the American Disabilities Act. But something a little bit newer of how it applies to websites is that websites basically have been now identified as public spaces, which when the act refers to public spaces, websites have basically fallen under that because people need to use websites to do things like banking, shopping, getting information, anything like that. So it kind of applies to websites as well. So because of that, websites now need to be accessible to all. So that includes people who are visually impaired and might use a screen reader, people who are hearing impaired, someone who has some sort of disability that means they can't use a standard mouse and keyboard, or people who have cognitive impairments.
That's fantastic. Well, and thank you, Sydney. And if I can even add to what Sydney said, including kind of take a quick take a quick trip back to history and to ADA compliance. Really, the ADA compliance has been around for a long time, back in the 70s. So in 1973, the U.S. Congress passed add a section called 508 amendment to the act to specifically for technology. That's basically said if any government entity that receive money from the federal government, their system must be able to accommodate for a person with disability. So that's including obviously in the 70s there was no website, but any computer network and so forth. Now there are multiple revisions to this. So back in the 90s, that get enhanced to even make it more prominent and making sure everyone knew of it. In the early 2000s, really the Department of Justice increased the visibility for ADA compliance when it comes to website. And the true piece that come to play and nowadays that one knows of it is really back in 2015 when the Department of Justice really kind of expands ADA to include almost every public good and services. So meaning that if a service is provided to the public by your company, therefore that service must be ADA compliance. Now, again, legally, as a public entity, your website does not have to be ADA compliance, but we're gonna go into the detail of that because this is a debate right now as we speak, including the recent big lawsuits and cases that went to the Supreme Court. We're gonna go unfold that in a little bit. But as of today, ADA compliance is that throughout history, ADA compliance has been there, but it's never so forefront until 2016. And nowadays, almost everyone is starting to be aware of it because it's affecting many businesses around, whether you're boat dealers or just a mom and pop store down the street. ADA can affect not just how your door is open, but really how your website, how people access your website. So without further ado, let me kind of bring this back. I give you a brief history into ADA compliance, how it related to website. But coming back is what are the guidelines, what are the guidance, how it affect a website, and what can a dealer or a boat club can do to ensure their website is ADA compliant. So Sydney, would you like to kind of give this a shot and tell us what does that entail?
Yeah, so there are a set of guidelines to be followed that will basically tell you if your website is compliant or not. It's a little bit difficult when we talk about this because, for someone as a business owner and they hear about ADA compliance and they say, okay, my website needs to be accessible for those who have disabilities. Well, how do I do that? How do I know if it is or not? And it's a hard question to answer because a lot of the steps are very technical, but there are a set of guidelines that are called Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, also known as WCAG, and there's 3 different levels within that. So there's A, AA, and then AAA. So the AA is typically standard. If you can kind of fit within those guidelines, then we can say, your website is ADA compliant. And again, these things are very technical, so it has to do with things like color contrast ratio. So if someone's colorblind and you don't have the right ratio of colors onto each other, they won't be able to read things on your website. It also has to do with things like alt text on images. So people who use a screen reader, you have to have tagging on the images so that if they can't see them, their device is able to read it. People being able to tab through your website, things like that, where the average person, isn't going to be able to see. You as a business owner isn't necessarily going to be able to see, but it's a set of, very technical guidelines that you have to follow.
That's fantastic. Now, one of the things that if I can go back to echo what Sydney said and how we come about to WCAG, a web content accessibility guideline, this is started back in 1994. So for those who know Tim Berners-Lee, who's basically the founder of the internet was not founded by Al Gore, as some may believe. That's just a joke. But it was the internet wasn't really founded by just Lee himself, although a lot of credit goes to him for what he were able to accomplish. But back in 1994, Lee thought if we have the internet, we must create a standard. So that's why he created this World Wide Web Consortium, which called W3C. And within the W3C, that's how in 2000 and in the 2000 they create what we call a web content accessibility guide, and that's really based on what Congress said. As you know, our government is awesome at this, where they set the rule, they set the law, and they say someone better figure out what the rules look like within the law. So what W3C were able to do is create this subdivision within called really Web Accessibility Initiative. Actually, when that started back in the 90s, late 90s, it called Web Accessibility Initiative, and that's how we get the Web World Wide Web Consortium C3. That's basically create WCAG, WCAG. WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guideline. So once that guideline were in place, so there are multiple versions of this along the way, as you can imagine. Now, Sydney mentioned currently there are 3 levels, but within those levels, there are versions. At the moment, currently in 2020, there are 2 key versions you must be aware of. One is version 2.0, and there is version 2.1. The big difference is that in late 2018, that's when version 2.1 was released. At the moment, as we speak, 2.0 is still very good and is acceptable in most places to just have it. So as a business, if you can meet version 2.0 level AA, your website is in compliance. However, if your website does not meet any of this, there are most likely a lot of elements that you are missing. Again, that's the big difference here in terms of what are the difference in the level. Again, 2.1 is currently out, and many ADA compliance agency actually go to make sure the website is in 2.1, although they do not have it they don't have to have it in 2.1. Your website can be in 2.0 and meet the current standard. Now, I know, Sydney, one of the things that I would suspect business owner would have is why should I be in compliance? And again, I do want to put that disclaimer out there. Again, we're not lawyers, but we have worked with dozens of clients with their website, from auditing, remediation / updates, and monitor those website, and we see the effect of this. But I do want to make sure that where does that fall under, and does compliance help me at all besides making a website readily for someone that may never visited Sydney, or is it important to have your website in compliant?
Yeah, so that really is the question that comes from all of this. If you know what ADA compliance is, you know kind of what goes into it, but then as a business owner, you're asking, so does my website need to be compliant or not? That's really the ultimate question that, we want to be able to answer for you. So like Harry said, we're not lawyers. We don't want to give like legal advice necessarily, because that's not our expertise. But from a website perspective and from what we've seen, in the world, this is basically, an answer to that question. So Harry earlier mentioned the 508 section of the ADA, American Disability Act. So based on that, if you are a government organization or a government-funded organization, you have to be ADA compliant. It's a legal requirement for you. If you are not, which majority of, anything, boat dealers or anything in the boating industry is probably not, government funded, so this would apply to you. It is not technically illegal. However, if a disabled person comes to your website and they are not able to access it, you are vulnerable to a lawsuit. So it's not technically illegal, but you are vulnerable to be sued if someone encounters your website and comes across it and sees that it's not ADA compliant. And so from there, a lot of people will be like, okay, it's probably not going to happen to me. I'm not, likely person for this to happen to, but we have seen large companies that have been sued, including Winn-Dixie, CVS, Nike, Fox, and Domino's Pizza, which was a big landmark case recently that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And we've seen in pretty much all of these cases, the judges will side in favor of the plaintiff. So if you do get sued, you most likely are not going to win that case. So even there, from hearing about these big companies that get sued, you might think, okay, well, still that probably doesn't apply to me. But we do know of cases specific to the boating industry, some local cases in our area in Southwest Florida where a boat dealer was sued, and there was actually a bunch of cases up in New York because someone who was a lawyer that actually specializes in these kind of cases visited a boat show, and they went to all the vendors' websites and basically, put cases out up against a bunch of these people in the boating industry specifically. And there is another kind of element to it. Like we said, unless you're government funded, it's not technically illegal. But if you do have a physical location that your website is tied to, so if you're a boat dealer and your website is promoting your boat dealership, which has a physical location, or if you're a boat rental club and your website is, marketing that you have a physical location, that makes you a little bit more vulnerable, because being tied to any kind of brick and mortar location just it basically increases the validity of the case that could get brought against you. So this is something that a lot of people are getting targeted. You could be a big company, you could be a small company, you could have a physical location, you could not have a physical location, and people in the boating industry specifically have been targeted with cases. So it is something that you are vulnerable to. And as we've said, it's at this point not technically illegal, but as more cases get brought up and as, the world becomes the world is relying more on websites and the internet and the digital world to get their information. I think, especially with that Domino's case, like we mentioned, going all the way up to the Supreme Court, it's only a matter of time before it does become a legal requirement for everyone. So
yeah, thank you, Sydney. And that's Sydney's right. The Domino Pizza specifically, as some of you may heard they went to the Supreme Court. The lower court in California has sided with the plaintiff, went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said the lower court stands. So meaning that basically that's a floodgate to, I think, what will come for many additional businesses. I know many universities, almost every one of my alma maters I went to get sued for ADA compliance. So it's just a matter of time. But one of the things that I want to kind of shift just briefly, this is going to be just a bit technical, but where as a business owner, there are key elements that you must be aware of. Again, this is not, you don't have to learn everything about ADA compliance, but what ADA compliance is able to achieve, there are 4 key elements to ADA compliance. There is the perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Those are the 4 key things. And when a website is ADA compliance, and really perceivable is basically make sure all the kind of text and all the text and images, all the multimedia that is on your website has alternative to, so that the user can understand it. For example, or here's a perfect example. Let's say on your website, you went to, I don't know, FIU, and you put FIU on your website. Most people will know what FIU is. But imagine if someone blind or can't hear or has disability issues, and a robot is reading that information for that person. FIU doesn't mean anything. This is where it's very important. This abbreviation must be well defined. That's what they call the title of this abbreviation. So within the title of this abbreviation, when the website is coded, FIU must be defined. Where FIU, and it doesn't matter if you define it first on the first paragraph, you have to do that in every other sentence where FIU, and then there's a special tag you apply to FIU where it says Florida International University. That is very, very important for your, I'm just giving that just as an example. That includes almost everything on your website. So another good one is kind of operable, which is functionality. When there is important things on your website. So for example, if you go to a contact form should not allow, for example, inside the form field, so inside the phone number field, there shouldn't be allowed any other characters except acceptable character to help identify a phone number. This is very, very, very important, because someone that is not able to read this or can't see this, or they have to use a special machine to actually put those information inside those form fields. If those form fields are not well defined, that can put you in hard seat and make the website is not compliant. So, and then also things like, for example, understandable. What that does is basically, can every single text and even the sentence on the website be read by a robot so that another human can understand it? This is very, very important. And these are come back to kind of making sure there is no error on the website, everything spelled out as it should be. And sometimes things that you might think is tedious, but it's, imagine not able to access certain information. That's how some people with disability are. They're not able to access the information themselves. They use certain machine to read this, and that's how you guide them. So it is very important that when you do not have, as a business owner, marketing person, or general manager that's listening to this right now, you might think, well, why should I learn all this? Well, in a way you don't. Most, not all agencies are well versed in this, but there are plenty of tools out there that you can use to learn, or at least get your website to some degree in compliance. Now, there are different levels of compliance, obviously, but here are the three things that you must understand about compliance. For ADA compliance, your website, there should always be an audit. You should audit your website. And the second thing, making sure you remediate your website. Remediate means updates. Make the updates based on the audit. So when you run an audit, you fix the errors you find from the audit, and then you rerun the audit again. And from there, you monitor it. My suggestion to most business owners, if you are not versed on this, and most likely most of us are not, and you don't have the time to monitor your website, my suggestion is highly recommend that you find an agency that knows about ADA compliance and willing to take over your website for you to ensure that the updates they make to your website, you are always in compliance. And I know Sydney gonna kind of give you a list of detail why a website that is compliant can help you. But one of the key thing here is that on a day-to-day basis, you're not gonna have the time, possibly the resources in-house to maintain ADA compliance. You're most likely gonna have either use an agency and or someone in-house, maybe you get trained. And one of the podcasts we will be covering, not on this one, but really the difference between using the existing tools versus using an agency that specializes just in ADA compliance, the difference between those two and how can you differentiate and which one, how you make decision in selecting an agency for ADA compliance. So I know, so with that, Sydney, can you basically give us an idea what are some of the benefits and upside? Obviously, there is plenty of downside for not being ADA compliance. You have less people visiting your website. Possibly you can get a lawyer that just go after you. And even if you were to be lucky and win in court, so by the time you finish with that litigation, you probably spend thousands and thousands of dollars. So you might as well get your website ADA compliance for a fraction of that cost anyways. So, but what are the upside to make sure your website is ADA compliant?
Yeah, so obviously the main, driving factor that we see behind making your website ADA compliant is, the threat of a lawsuit or, seeing that you're going to have to pay all these legal fees and deal with, the stress of, having a lawsuit brought against you is obviously nothing that any business owner wants to go through. So that really is, the main thing that drives, at least from what we see, people to learn more about ADA compliance. But there are a couple other points that I like to touch on and just talk about whenever we're having these conversations, because I think it is important to just bring more context to the situation and kind of just look at the bigger picture, I guess, when you're going through something like this. So one of the first things I want to mention is that most of the guidelines for ADA, which, we talked about the WCAG earlier and the standards that are set to make your website ADA compliant, pretty much all of those are things that fall in line with SEO best practices and things that fall in line with making your website more user-friendly. So it's almost like it becomes twofold. By making your website ADA compliant, you're improving your SEO and you're making a more user-friendly website. And again, when we talk about ADA compliance, people will say, well, how many blind people are really going to my website, or how many people with this disability are really going through my website? But there's people who might have things like temporary impairments or situations that might cause them to have difficulty when navigating your website. So this kind of considers a whole larger group of people and makes it easier for them to use the website. And then also just in general, it's just improving your website. So that's a really, really important thing to consider. You're almost saving yourself time in a way. The time that you could be putting into SEO, you're kind of crossing that over to help with that. And then another point, which kind of ties into what I was saying before, when people say, how many people really go on my website that have this disability or whatever, but the numbers show that 1 in 5 people have some kind of disability. So by not having your website be ADA compliant, you're limiting your audience. It's not just the threat of, oh, if someone can't access my website, they're going to sue me. You're opening yourself up to a broader audience by doing this and being proactive and making your website ADA compliant. So that's another, really important thing. And then last but not least, which I think is really important, because obviously, the threat of a lawsuit is scary, and making sure that you're not opening yourself up to any vulnerabilities as a business owner. But I think it is important to not take that defensive or like negative stance on it, and just think that by doing this, you're being more socially responsible, you're being more inclusive, and you're benefiting the community and those around you. If you kind of take the previous examples like we talked about, like including wheelchair ramps and including handicap bathrooms, we wouldn't say like, why do we have to have wheelchair ramps or why do we have to have handicap bathrooms? It's just a standard that we have now because we want to be able to include everyone, and we want things in the world to be accessible for everyone. So I think it's important to look at websites the same way.
That's fantastic, Sydney. That's really tied in and kind of really into kind of some of the best practice. Kind of, I want to kind of leave you guys up with some of the things that and the team here we talk about all the time, and kind of some of the best practice. We put the guideline, and if you ever have a chance to go to our website, we do have these guidelines available to download as well. But is by just looking at it, if you never train on ADA compliance for website, it would be very, very hard to just look at something. So don't rely on just the color and the navigation or the color of the image to say this is in compliance, this is uncompliant, because there are tools out there that helps you do that, but also it requires some training. Just like, again, if you are a professional boater, you know some of the element on a boat, what make this boat faster than the other one, and why some boats are better than the other one. It's the same thing for that apply to almost everything in life. ADA is the same thing as well. Certain tools and ADA compliance make a big difference. Again, coming back again, some of the best practices: do not rely on just color or just by looking at the difference between the color and the image and the text. Making sure all the images on your website have the proper tags, and especially for complex images. Now, when you can, and if you can, avoid using any super complex images on your website. So that's very hard to explain. So maybe an image that's very contrasty. It's best to have an image. So, for example, that it's very easy to give a description to that image. So, for example, if you are a boat dealers that carry a Robalo or Greely White, maybe you could, the description of this image could Greely White Canyon 256 model 2020. That is very descriptive, and that when a system read this, it's very easy for the user to identify what that is, and you can almost describing it. To even take this a step further, I would add to that descriptive name even the color of that boat, so that way, again, this is all in the tag itself, on the title for that image, so that when the robot read that information, it can almost spell out what's in there for the user. Now, also functionality. Make sure the functionality of the website itself, including the navigation, all the links that's included, are accessible directly to the keyboard and the voice control without using mouse. Now, most of us, we used to be able to touch the screen by now, or just take our mouse and then point to the thing that we need. But again, not everyone have the capability to do so due to accessibility, due to disability. So you have to make sure your website has all the functionalities in place, so that the user can use maybe a keyboard, because that's might be the only thing they can do. They can use just a mouse, or they can use just a voice command. Sometimes none of these are available for that user to use. That user might use a special system to read the website. And if your website is not meeting those basic guidelines, this functionality is not available for that user. And the other thing is, if you have audio on the website, so for example, audio, video, make sure you provide a transcripts for the user to be able to maybe read along or give that information. So for example, our podcast right now we are talking about, if you go to our website, you will find a full transcript of that podcast, because we know there might be users that come to our website that may not be able to listen to what we are saying, but they want to be able to read that information. Making sure that whatever you have, whatever the medium you have, whether it's a video, whether it's an audio or what have you, if possible, when possible, just try to transcribe it and make sure it's available on the website, especially video. The new law that came out early last year, right now it is required. If you have a website, if you have a video on the website, the video should be not only provide captions as it goes, but it's also required to have a full transcript of that video as well. And also, one of the key thing that I think most websites should have, and the easiest way to see if even your website is in compliance, if you go to your keyboard and you type, you press the tab button. So if the website is, I don't want to say the website is compliance at that case, but if the website is even an attempt to be in compliance, when you click on the tab button, there would be a navigation button that's pop up right above the main navigation. And that navigation you see up there, only people with disability that using a special machine will see this automatic. For you to see it, if you do not have that special machine, you actually have to press tab and then you see this pop up. This is very, very important. That's one of the key, kind of the first thing you can test to see if your website is attempt to have to be in compliance. Now, I know there are tons of questions that might be coming to this, and some of them I have a few of them here I just want to answer very quick. So for example, I know some website, they do have PDF documents. Now, does your PDF document need to be in compliance, and how do you make it in compliance? The short answer is yes. If you want your website to be in compliance, so almost everything on the website, not almost, but everything on the website has to be in compliance to meet full compliance standard. So including your PDF documents, and there are plenty of tools out there to make a PDF document compliance. It's basically, those PDF might have to be rewritten, restructured a little bit, but they can be compliant. You just have to go through the motion of getting them. Another question is like, how descriptive an email should be in terms of for the email, for each of the images on the website. As I mentioned just earlier, be as descriptive as you can be, and so don't say lady with a red shirt and photo. That means nothing to the end user, but be descriptive. Possibly even give the age, possibly even give a quick background of where that person might be standing. So coming back to the board example I was giving earlier, I was using Greeley White, but again, if we could come back on my alt tag for an image with Greeley White, Kenyan 256 blue, light blue color, that's what I would put in there, and put the year, so that way when the system read this information, someone that cannot see this can actually understand what that is. Now, another thing I know that a lot of people ask us as of late is, what are some of the good tools out there? There are plenty of tools. I don't think we want to dedicate a new podcast just about the tools, different methods, how to test ADA and making sure you're in compliance. We're not going to go into the detail of the tools right now, but there are plenty of tools. But be careful with the tools that you use, because the biggest thing I see with the tools, people think that they put that tools on their website and their website is automatically compliant. And that's not the case most of the time. The tools that people use on their website may help guide certain element on the website to meet certain standard and compliance, but those tools don't make your website compliant. Again, think of it, you build your website, the website has a bunch of codes that make it function, and someone just drop one piece of code and they say the website is compliant. That doesn't really add up much. Now, there are cases that it does, but there are, most of the time, you want your website for longevity, for a long-term reason, you want your website to be in compliance by making sure the codes behind those pages are adjusted accordingly, not just having a flyover within. And we will be covering all the different tools and ADA compliance in more detail in the upcoming podcast we will have. We at Boat Marketing Pros, we are a spin-off of Artilis, and Artilis is an agency here. We work with dozens of clients all over, from international to local mom and pop store, to make sure their website meet ADA compliance. And we would love to talk with you to kind of answer any question you have. As we said, if you have any questions and any tips, we would love to hear from you. Just email us at podcast@boatmarketingpros.com or visit us at boatmarketingpros.com/podcast and to learn more. And with that, I know I've been going on for a bit, but I would love to, Sydney, I would love for you to kind of, if you have any last word, any comment you would like to close with. But I know I don't want. I just wanted to cover those last piece of element. I know that might be questions coming to us. I wanted to address them.
Yeah, I mean, I think we really were able to cover a lot when it comes to this topic. It can, get a little technical, get a little complicated, but we kind of tried to put it into those terms that it makes sense for you as a business owner in the boating industry, what you really need to know to kind of understand how it applies to you. We do have a lot of other, resources, blog posts, and information that you can get on our website or that we can share with you if you reach out to us to, give you more information about ADA. And, like Harry said, there's a lot of things that we do with this podcast is kind of trying to give you more information as a business owner, resources that, you can use or you can use when collaborating with an agency to help grow your business. But when it comes to ADA, it is really one of those things to fully, implement it and maintain it. You really do need to work with someone that's an expert. It's not, you can learn about it and, become educated on it, but I wouldn't say it's something that, you should really try to tackle yourself. It's really something that you need to have a person with the technical knowledge who knows what to do specific to ADA. It's one of those things you really need to kind of reach out and get help with.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That's really concluded for us here, folks. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any comment, tips, or any questions, things that you would like for us to address on the podcast. Our email address is podcast@boatmarketingpost.com, or visit us at boatmarketingpost.com/podcast to get all the latest